January 12th, Crestview Heights. Doyle Faulkner sat at the defense table, the picture of refined tragedy. At 16, he was the son of a legal dynasty, now playing the role of a boy shattered by a broken mind. To the jury, he was a victim of his own biology, a brilliant student who had simply slipped into a dark, uncontrollable void. For Doyle, the trial was merely a stage, and he was the star of a drama he called The Insanity of Genius. He believed the high-priced experts and his father's influence would reduce his brutal crime to a mere medical stay. But he forgot about the one thing a perfectionist cannot delete: his own obsession with the process. A single voice note from a smartwatch, audio log number 9, would dismantle the lie. By the time Judge Vane looked Doyle in the eye for the final sentencing, the tragic poet would be revealed as a cold-blooded technician. The performance was about to meet its final curtain. The courtroom smelled of old wood and recycled air. Doyle had noticed it the first time they brought him in, wearing the orange jumpsuit over his white undershirt, the fabric scratching against his skin in a way that offended his sensibilities. He had expected to hate the color, the institutional ugliness of it, but he found it oddly theatrical. The jumpsuit made him look vulnerable, like a boy who had been stripped of everything. That played well, he thought. The jury needed to see him as broken, not dangerous. Judge Carolyn Vane sat elevated above the proceedings, her grey hair pulled back in a severe bun, her face carved from years of witnessing human cruelty and desperate lies. She had presided over the Superior Court in Crestview Heights for 23 years, and she had developed an instinct for performance. She could smell it the way a bloodhound smells fear. And Doyle Faulkner reeked of it. The arraignment began with the usual formalities. The clerk read the charges. Manslaughter in the first degree. The initial charge, a compromise the district attorney had been willing to pursue before the investigation deepened, before the encryption was broken, before they found what Doyle had been hiding. Doyle stood when instructed, his movements slow and deliberate, as though he were underwater. His attorney, Gerald Whitmore, a man with silver hair and a reputation for defending the indefensible, placed a hand on Doyle's shoulder. Whitmore had been paid $250,000 up front by Doyle's father, a corporate lawyer who believed money could purchase innocence the way it purchased everything else. Judge Vane asked for the plea. Whitmore cleared his throat. "Your Honor, my client enters a plea of not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect." Doyle looked up at the judge, his pale blue eyes glassy and distant. He had practiced that look in the mirror of his holding cell, perfecting the vacant stare of someone whose mind had betrayed him. But then the judge mispronounced a term. She referred to the mens rea standard, but her Latin was slightly off. The syllables clipped in the wrong places. Doyle could not help himself. He leaned toward the microphone at the defense table, his voice soft but clear. "Your Honor, it is pronounced mens rea, not mens rea. The distinction is important for the record." The courtroom went silent. Whitmore closed his eyes as if in pain. Judge Vane stared down at Doyle, her expression unreadable. Then she smiled, just barely. "Thank you, Mr. Faulkner. I will make a note of that." Prosecutor Marcus Thorne, a lean man in his early 40s with the sharp features of a falcon, leaned back in his chair and smiled. He did not bother to hide it. Doyle had just given him a gift. A tiny crack in the facade of the broken boy who could barely speak above a whisper. Thorne had been preparing for this case for 3 months. He had studied every piece of evidence, every witness statement, every digital footprint Doyle had left behind. He knew what the defense would argue. They would trot out brain scans and expert psychiatrists who would testify that Doyle suffered from a dissociative disorder, a break from reality so severe that he could not be held responsible for his actions. They would paint him as a victim of his own neurology. But Thorne had something better. He had audiolog number 9. The arraignment concluded with the standard motions. Bail was denied, as expected. Doyle would remain in custody at the Juvenile Detention Center until the trial concluded. As the guards approached to escort him out, Doyle turned toward the gallery, where a cluster of news cameras had been positioned. He tilted his head slightly, allowing the light to catch his face at the most flattering angle. He looked like a tragic figure from a Renaissance painting, a boy king brought low by fate. As he was led away, Thorne gathered his files and spoke quietly to his co-counsel, a sharp young attorney named Lena Briggs. "Did you see that?" he asked, the Latin correction. Lena nodded. "He cannot help himself. He thinks he is smarter than everyone in the room." Thorne smiled. "Good. That makes our job easier." The investigation had begun on a cold morning in early December. A jogger named Patricia Hemmings had been running through Lakewood Park, a wooded area on the outskirts of Crestview Heights, when she saw something unusual near the Eastern Trail. At first, she thought it was a pile of discarded clothing. Then she saw the hand. Patricia called 911, her voice shaking as she tried to describe what she had found. The dispatcher kept her on the line, instructing her to move away from the area and wait for the police. Within minutes, 3 patrol cars arrived, followed shortly by Detective Sarah Vance. Vance was a veteran investigator with the Crestview Heights Police Department, a woman in her late 40s who had worked everything from petty theft to organized crime. She approached the scene with the calm efficiency of someone who had seen too much to be easily shaken. But what she found in Lakewood Park stayed with her. The victim was a 17-year-old girl named Emily Strauss. She had been reported missing 2 days earlier by her parents, who said she had gone out for a walk and never returned. Emily was a junior at Crestview Academy, a private school known for its rigorous academic programs and wealthy student body. She played violin in the school orchestra. She had been planning to apply to Juilliard. The crime scene was strange. Emily's body had been positioned carefully, her arms at her sides, her legs straight. There were no signs of a struggle in the immediate area. No scuff marks in the dirt, no broken branches. It looked staged, Vance thought, like someone had arranged her. 50 yards away, sitting on a bench with his back to the scene, was Doyle Faulkner. He was staring straight ahead, his hands resting on his knees, his expression blank. He did not react when the officers approached. He did not speak when they asked his name. He simply sat there, perfectly still, as though he were waiting for something. One of the patrol officers recognized him. "That is Doyle Faulkner. His dad is Richard Faulkner, the attorney." Vance approached slowly. "Doyle," she said, "can you hear me?" No response. His eyes did not even flicker. She tried again. "Doyle, I need you to stand up for me. We need to talk." Still nothing. Vance motioned to the officers. "Call an ambulance, get him checked out, and get a warrant for his house." Doyle was taken to Crestview General Hospital, where he was examined by a psychiatrist. The doctor noted that Doyle appeared to be in a catatonic state, unresponsive to verbal stimuli, his body rigid. But there was something odd about it. His vitals were normal. His pupils reacted to light. And when the doctor left the room for a moment, a nurse swore she saw Doyle check his watch. By the time Doyle was formally arrested, Vance and her team had already begun searching his home. The Faulkner estate was a sprawling colonial in the wealthiest part of Crestview Heights, complete with a home theatre, a wine cellar, and a private studio in the basement where Doyle spent most of his time. The studio was a soundproofed room filled with high-end audio equipment, microphones, mixers, digital audio workstations, reference monitors that cost more than most people's cars. On the walls were posters of experimental musicians and sound artists, people who worked in the spaces between music and noise. Vance found 3 laptops, 2 external hard drives, and a desktop computer with custom encryption software. Everything was password protected. Everything was locked down tight. But they also found the smartwatch. It was sitting on Doyle's desk, connected to a charging cable. The watch was an expensive model, one designed for athletes and tech enthusiasts, with a built-in microphone capable of recording high-fidelity audio. Vance bagged it as evidence, not yet understanding how critical it would become. The trial began on a grey January morning. The courthouse was packed with reporters, curious onlookers, and members of the community who wanted to see justice done for Emily Strauss. Her parents sat in the front row of the gallery, their faces hollow with grief. Her father, Robert, held his wife's hand tightly, his knuckles white. Doyle entered the courtroom, flanked by guards, his orange jumpsuit a stark contrast to the polished wood and brass fixtures. He moved slowly, his head down, playing the part of the broken boy. But as he took his seat, he allowed himself a glance at the jury. 12 people, a mix of ages and backgrounds, people who would decide his fate. He studied them with the detachment of a scientist observing lab rats. Whitmore leaned over and whispered, "Remember what we discussed. You do not speak unless I tell you to. You look at the floor. You look fragile. Do you understand?" Doyle nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. He was thinking about the trial as a composition, a piece of performance art. The jury was his audience. The judge was the conductor, and he was the soloist. Thorne delivered his opening statement with the precision of a surgeon. He described the crime in unflinching detail. Emily Strauss had been walking through Lakewood Park when she was attacked. The medical evidence would show that she had been restrained, that she had been alive for several minutes after the initial assault, that she had suffered. And the evidence would show that Doyle Faulkner had not been in the grip of madness. He had been in complete control. Whitmore countered with a narrative of tragedy. Doyle Faulkner was a brilliant young man, a gifted student and musician who had been suffering from a severe mental illness. The defense would present brain scans, psychiatric evaluations, and expert testimony showing that Doyle had experienced a psychotic break, a complete disconnection from reality. He had not known what he was doing. He had been a prisoner inside his own mind, watching helplessly as his body acted without his consent. The first witness was Patricia Hemmings, the jogger who had discovered Emily's body. She took the stand nervously, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Thorne asked her to describe what she had seen that morning. "I was running my usual route," she said. "I run through Lakewood Park 3 times a week. It was around 7 in the morning. The sun was just coming up. I saw something on the ground near the Eastern Trail. At first, I thought it was trash, but then I got closer." "What did you see?" Thorne asked. Patricia's voice cracked. I saw a hand, and then I realized it was a person, a girl. I called 911 right away. Did you see anyone else in the park? Yes, there was a boy sitting on a bench. He was just sitting there, staring at nothing. I thought it was strange, but I did not approach him. I was too scared. Whitmore cross-examined gently. Miss Hemmings, when you saw my client sitting on the bench, did he appear to be aware of his surroundings? No, Patricia said. He looked like he was in a trance or something. He did not move at all. Thank you, Whitmore said, satisfied. The catatonic state was part of the defense narrative. Detective Vance took the stand next. She described the crime scene in meticulous detail, walking the jury through photographs that showed Emily's body, the surrounding area, and the bench where Doyle had been found. She explained the initial investigation, the discovery of the audio equipment in Doyle's home, and the process of obtaining a warrant to search his digital devices. Thorne asked, Detective, when you first encountered the defendant at the scene, what was his behavior like? He was unresponsive, Vance said. He did not speak, did not react to questions. But there was something about it that felt off. His posture was too perfect, too controlled. Whitmore objected. Speculation, Your Honor. Sustained, Judge Vane said. The jury will disregard the detective's characterization. But the seed had been planted. The jury had heard it. The medical examiner, Dr. Kenneth Rothman, testified about the autopsy. Emily had died from asphyxiation. The time of death was estimated to be between 6 and 7 in the morning, consistent with Patricia's discovery. But the critical detail was the timeline. Based on the injuries, Emily had been alive and conscious for approximately 10 minutes after the initial assault. Thorne let that fact hang in the air. 10 minutes, he repeated. Dr. Rothman, in your professional opinion, would that have been enough time for someone to regain control of their actions if they were experiencing a psychotic break? Whitmore objected, but Judge Vane allowed the question. Dr. Rothman nodded. In most cases of acute psychosis, yes, there would have been moments of lucidity, especially over a 10-minute period. Doyle shifted in his seat. He began doodling on the notepad in front of him, intricate geometric patterns that spiraled outward. He did not look at the jury. He did not want them to see the irritation in his eyes. The defense presented its case over the next several days. Whitmore brought in a neurologist who testified about the functional magnetic resonance imaging scans of Doyle's brain. The scans showed reduced activity in the prefrontal cortex and the regions associated with empathy and impulse control. The neurologist argued that this was evidence of a neurological disorder, something that could explain Doyle's actions. Thorne cross-examined aggressively. Doctor, is it possible for someone with reduced activity in these regions to still function normally in daily life? Yes, the neurologist admitted. It is possible. Is it possible for someone with this brain scan to plan complex activities, to use technology, to make decisions? Yes, so this scan does not prove that my client was incapable of understanding right from wrong. The neurologist hesitated. Not definitively, no. A psychiatrist took the stand and diagnosed Doyle with a dissociative disorder. He described the catatonic state Doyle had been found in, the reports from the hospital, the way Doyle had described his experience as being inside a glass box, watching but unable to control his actions. Thorne asked, Doctor, did you independently verify this claim, or are you relying solely on the defendant's self-reported symptoms? The psychiatrist shifted uncomfortably. Much of psychiatric diagnosis is based on patient self-report. So if the defendant were lying, you would have no way to know. Whitmore objected, but the damage was done. The turning point came when the prosecution called Jeffrey Marks, Doyle's information technology teacher from Crestview Academy. Marks was a quiet man in his 50s, with thick glasses and a nervous habit of adjusting his tie. He had taught Doyle for 2 years and had been impressed by his technical abilities. Thorne asked, "Mr. Marks, can you describe Doyle's skill level with computers and digital technology?" Marks nodded. Doyle was far beyond what we typically see in high school students. He understood encryption, network security, audio engineering. He built his own server at home. He was brilliant, really. Did he ever discuss his interest in encryption with you? Yes, he was obsessed with privacy. He told me once that most people leave digital fingerprints everywhere, but he prided himself on leaving none. Thorne pulled up a report on the courtroom screen. "Mr. Marks, this is a report from our digital forensics team. They found multiple encrypted folders on Doyle's computer. It took them weeks to break the encryption. Have you ever seen a 16-year-old use this level of security?" Marks shook his head. "No, that is well beyond what most adults could do." Whitmore tried to salvage the testimony. "Mr. Marks, is it possible that Doyle used encryption simply because he valued his privacy, not because he had something to hide?" Marks hesitated. "I suppose so." But Thorne was not finished. He called a forensic computer specialist named Angela Ramirez, a woman who had worked for the Federal Bureau of Investigation before joining the State Forensics Lab. She walked the jury through the process of breaking Doyle's encryption, explaining the layers of security, the false partitions designed to mislead investigators. "This was not the work of someone trying to hide embarrassing photos," she said. "This was the work of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. And when they finally broke through the encryption, they found folders filled with audio files. Hundreds of them. Recordings of ambient sounds, footsteps, breathing, whispers. And they found the logs from Doyle's smartwatch." Thorne introduced the smartwatch into evidence. He held it up for the jury to see, the small black device looking innocuous in the plastic evidence bag. "This watch," he said, "was set to record high-fidelity audio. It has a built-in microphone designed to capture clean sound even in noisy environments. And it was on Doyle's wrist the morning Emily Strauss was killed." Ramirez explained that the watch had multiple audio logs stored in its memory. Most of them were mundane, recordings of Doyle walking through the city, sitting in cafes, having conversations. But audio log number 9 was different. Doyle's fingers stopped moving. The pen he had been holding snapped in his hand. Whitmore stood quickly. "Your Honor, we need to discuss the admissibility of this evidence in chambers." Judge Vane looked at him coolly. "Mr. Whitmore, unless you have a legal basis for exclusion, the evidence will be heard." Whitmore argued that the recording had been obtained without proper consent, that it violated privacy laws. But Thorne countered that the watch had been seized legally under a valid warrant, and that the recording had been made in a public place where there was no expectation of privacy. Judge Vane ruled in favor of the prosecution. The audio will be played. The courtroom lights were dimmed. The jury leaned forward in their seats. Doyle sat frozen, his hands pressed flat against the table, his breathing shallow. Ramirez pressed play. The first sound was wind, rustling through trees. Then footsteps, slow and deliberate. A voice, soft and measured. Doyle's voice. "The wind is too high. I need to shield the watch." A pause. The sound of fabric moving. "Okay, starting the recording now. Let's see if the scream hits the 80 decibel mark." The courtroom was silent. Every eye was on the speaker. The recording continued, breathing, steady and controlled. The sound of movement, and then, faintly, a gasp, a struggle, the rustle of clothing. And through it all, Doyle's breathing remained calm, methodical. Another whisper. "Make sure the mic is closer. I need the frequency of the gasp to be crisp. They will think I am crazy, but I am just a perfectionist." The recording ended. The silence that followed was deafening. Doyle had curled in on himself, his hands covering his ears, his body shaking. It was not the performance he had planned. This was real panic, the terror of being exposed. Whitmore sat with his head in his hands. He had known the case was difficult, but he had believed in the psychiatric defense. Now he knew it was over. Thorne stood. "Your Honor, the prosecution rests." The defense had no rebuttal. There was nothing they could say. The jury had heard Doyle's voice, calm and clinical, giving himself technical notes while committing murder. No amount of brain scans or psychiatric testimony could explain that away. The closing arguments were brief. Thorne reminded the jury of what they had heard. He walked them through the timeline, the evidence, the lies Doyle had told. And he reminded them of the audio. "That is not the voice of a boy in a psychotic break," he said. "That is the voice of a predator." Whitmore tried. He argued that mental illness was complex, that the jury could not fully understand what Doyle had been experiencing. But his heart was not in it. Even he had heard the recording. Even he knew. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When they returned, the forewoman stood and delivered the verdict. Guilty of murder in the first degree. Doyle did not react. He sat perfectly still, staring at the table. Judge Vane set the sentencing hearing for the following week. In the interim, victim impact statements would be heard. Robert Strauss took the stand, his face grey with exhaustion. He held a small audio player in his hands. "Your Honor," he said, "I would like to play something for the court." He pressed play. The sound of a young girl laughing filled the courtroom. It was Emily, her voice bright and full of life. The recording was from a family trip, a moment of pure joy captured on a phone. Robert stopped the recording. "That is the only sound that mattered," he said, his voice breaking. "And he will never hear it again." Doyle stared at the floor. He did not look up. Emily's mother, Caroline, spoke next. She described her daughter's kindness, her passion for music, her dreams. She described the hole that Emily's death had left in their lives, a void that could never be filled. And she looked directly at Doyle. "You took everything from us," she said. "And for what? For a recording. For your art." Doyle's lawyer had advised him not to speak, but Doyle could not help himself. He looked up, his eyes red. "I did not mean for it to be like this," he whispered. Caroline's face hardened. "Yes, you did. You planned every second of it." The sentencing hearing took place on a cold morning. The courtroom was packed once again, the gallery filled with reporters, community members, and Emily's family. Judge Vane sat at the bench, her expression grave. She had read every piece of evidence, listened to every witness, and spent the previous night reviewing the audio recording. She had presided over many trials, but this one had shaken her. She looked down at Doyle, who sat in his orange jumpsuit, his hands folded in his lap. He looked small and young, almost fragile. But she knew better. "Mr. Faulkner," she began, her voice low and steady. "Over the course of this trial, I have heard many things. I have heard your attorneys argue that you were in the grip of a mental illness, that you were not in control of your actions. I have heard experts testify about brain scans and psychiatric diagnoses. I have heard you described as a victim of your own biology." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "But then, I heard your voice. I heard you speak, clearly and calmly, as you committed an act of unimaginable cruelty. I heard you give yourself technical notes, adjusting the microphone, measuring the sound. I heard you treat a human life like a sample in a recording studio." Doyle's shoulders began to shake. He kept his eyes down, unable to meet her gaze. "You spoke of art, Mr. Faulkner. You spoke of glass boxes and involuntary actions. But we did not hear a sick boy on those tapes. We heard a producer. We heard someone who was completely in control, someone who was focused and deliberate. You were not lost in a psychotic break. You were performing." Judge Vane leaned forward, her voice rising. "You are not mentally ill, Mr. Faulkner. You are simply devoid of a soul. You looked at another human being, a girl with dreams and a family who loved her, and you saw an opportunity. You saw a chance to create something, to record something authentic. You treated her suffering as raw material." Doyle was crying now, tears streaming down his face. But Judge Vane did not soften. "You sat in this courtroom and played the role of a broken boy. You whispered and doodled and looked at the jury with pity, as if they were too simple to understand you. You believed your intelligence made you special, that your so-called genius gave you the right to do whatever you wanted. But you were wrong." She let the silence stretch, her eyes boring into him. "Your intelligence does not make you superior. It makes you dangerous. You used your gifts not to create, not to contribute, but to destroy. You took a life, and you did it for no reason other than your own curiosity. You wanted to see if you could. You wanted to hear what it sounded like." The courtroom was completely silent. Even the reporters had stopped taking notes, transfixed by the judge's words. Emily Strauss was 17 years old. She played the violin. She had been accepted to a summer program at Juilliard. She had a future, a family, friends who loved her. And you erased all of that. You took her from this world, and for what? For a recording. For a piece of audio that you thought would make you feel something. Judge Vane's voice dropped to a whisper, more menacing than a shout. "But it did not work, did it, Mr. Faulkner? You still felt nothing. Because you are empty. You are a void dressed in human skin, and no amount of suffering, no amount of authentic sound will ever fill that emptiness inside you." Doyle sobbed openly, his body shaking. But it was not remorse. It was the agony of having his performance dismantled, of being seen for what he truly was. This court has heard the evidence. This court has heard your voice. And this court finds that you are not a victim. You are a predator. You are a danger to every person who crosses your path, and you will be treated as such. Judge Vane straightened, her voice formal now. Mr. Faulkner, you have been found guilty of murder in the 1st degree. The law allows me discretion in sentencing, given your age. But I have no hesitation in imposing the maximum sentence allowed. She paused, her gaze unwavering. You are hereby sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum of 49 years before eligibility for parole. You will be transferred to a maximum security facility upon your 18th birthday. Until then, you will remain in juvenile detention under the highest level of supervision. Doyle's sobs grew louder. Whitmore placed a hand on his shoulder, but Doyle shook it off. Judge Vane was not finished. I want you to understand something, Mr. Faulkner. You will spend the rest of your life in a small cell. You will not have access to your computers, your recording equipment, your microphones. You will not be able to create your art. The only sound you will hear is the silence of your own isolation. She leaned forward one last time, her voice cutting through Doyle's sobs. You wanted to capture the authentic sound of suffering. Now you will live it, every single day for the rest of your life. May the silence of your cell be the only music you hear. Judge Vane brought down her gavel. The sound echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. Doyle was led away in chains. He tried to hide his face from the cameras, turning away as the flashes went off. The boy who had once posed in the light now cowered from it. As the guards escorted him through the side door, he looked back one last time at the courtroom. His eyes found Emily's parents. Robert was holding Caroline, both of them weeping. Doyle opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came. There was nothing left to say. In the weeks that followed, the case became a national story. News outlets ran features on Doyle Faulkner, the teenage killer who had recorded his own crime. Legal experts debated the use of digital evidence in court. Privacy advocates raised concerns about the implications of smartwatch recordings. But in Connecticut, the focus was different. Legislators introduced a bill that would expand the rules for digital evidence in juvenile cases, ensuring that recordings like audio log number 9 could be used to establish premeditation and intent. The bill passed unanimously and was signed into law 6 months later. The media nicknamed it Doyle's Law. Emily's parents established a scholarship fund in her name, supporting young musicians who wanted to pursue their dreams. The first recipient was a violinist from Crestview Academy, a girl who had been Emily's friend. Detective Vance returned to her work, though the case stayed with her. She thought about Doyle often, about the way he had sat on that bench, perfectly still, waiting to be found. She wondered if he had wanted to be caught, if the performance had required an audience. The smartwatch remained in the evidence locker at the Crestview Heights Police Department, sealed in its plastic bag. Its screen was dark, the battery long dead, but the data had been preserved, copied onto secure servers, a permanent record of what Doyle had done. In the maximum security wing of the Juvenile Detention Center, Doyle sat in his cell. The walls were blank. the space barely large enough for a bed and a small desk. There were no windows, no natural light. The only sound was the hum of the ventilation system and the occasional footsteps of the guards. Doyle had tried to adjust, to find some way to occupy his mind. He asked for books, for paper to draw on, but the isolation gnawed at him. He had always surrounded himself with sound, with music, with the constant stimulation of his projects. Now there was nothing. He thought about Emily sometimes, not with guilt, but with a kind of clinical curiosity. He wondered what she had been thinking in those final moments, what she had felt. He wished he could have asked her. But mostly he thought about the recording. Audiolog number 9. He replayed it in his mind, analyzing the frequencies, the tones, the way the microphone had captured every detail. It had been good work, he thought. Perhaps his best. He would never hear it again. The court had ordered all copies destroyed, except for the one held in evidence. But Doyle did not need to hear it. He had memorized every second. In his cell, in the silence, he closed his eyes and listened to the memory. The wind, the footsteps, his own voice, calm and precise. Make sure the mic is closer. I need the frequency of the gasp to be crisp. He smiled, just a little. They had called him a monster, a predator, a void. But they were wrong. He was an artist, and his work would live forever, locked away in an evidence locker, a testament to his genius. The smile faded, the silence pressed in. And Doyle Faulkner, the boy who had tried to capture the sound of suffering, was left alone with his own. Judge Vane went home that evening and poured herself a glass of wine. She sat in her study, the case files still spread across her desk. She had delivered many sentences in her career, but this one felt different. She had looked into Doyle's eyes and seen nothing. No remorse, no understanding. Just the cold calculation of someone who believed they were above consequence. She thought about what she had said to him. You are a void dressed in human skin. The words had come from a place of deep anger, a moral revulsion that she rarely allowed herself to express from the bench. But they had been true. She closed the case file and locked it in her drawer. Tomorrow there would be another trial, another defendant, another chance to find justice. But tonight, she allowed herself to feel the weight of what she had witnessed. In Crestview Heights, life continued. The park where Emily had been found was reopened after the investigation concluded. A small memorial was placed near the Eastern Trail, a bronze plaque with Emily's name and the dates of her too short life. People left flowers there, and sometimes, in the early morning, you could hear the faint sound of a violin playing from a nearby street, a neighbor's tribute to the girl who had loved music. Doyle's father, Richard Faulkner, left Crestview Heights. He sold the estate, dissolved his law practice, and moved across the country. He never spoke publicly about his son. When reporters tracked him down, he refused to comment. The shame had broken him in a way that no courtroom ever could. The story of Doyle Faulkner became a cautionary tale, a reminder that intelligence without empathy is not genius. It is monstrosity. Teachers used the case in ethics classes. Psychologists studied it, trying to understand the mind of someone who could be so detached from their own humanity. But for those who had known Emily, the case was not an academic exercise. It was a wound that would never fully heal. Her friends graduated from Crestview Academy and went on to college, carrying her memory with them. Her parents grew old in a house that felt too empty, filling the silence with recordings of her laughter, her music, her voice. And in a small cell, Doyle Faulkner sat in the darkness, listening to the silence he had created. The silence that would be his companion for the next 49 years, and perhaps for the rest of his life. He had wanted to capture something authentic, something real. And he had. He had captured his own damnation, preserved it in digital form, and ensured that the world would never forget what he had done. The smartwatch in the evidence locker remained a symbol, a reminder that in the digital age, nothing is truly erased. Every action leaves a trace, every word is recorded, every moment of cruelty is preserved. Doyle had believed he could control the narrative, that he could perform his way to freedom. But the machine had betrayed him. His own obsession with perfection had created the evidence that destroyed him. As the years passed, the case faded from the headlines. New tragedies took its place, new monsters emerged to capture the public's attention. But in the legal community, Doyle's law remained, a tool for prosecutors to use against those who believed technology could hide their crimes. And in the silence of his cell, Doyle Faulkner waited. He counted the days, the weeks, the years. He imagined a future where he might be released, where he could return to his work. But that future was 49 years away, a lifetime from now. Until then, there was only silence. The silence Judge Vane had promised him. The silence that would be his only music, his only companion, his only truth. The performance was over. The audience had gone home, and Doyle Faulkner was left alone with the sound of nothing at all.